All right, so welcome to Chapter 7, where we're going to talk about small businesses and entrepreneurships. Excuse me. So first start talking about launching a new venture. So, years leading up to COVID 19, right? I know we're all sick of hearing about COVID 19. The U.S. economy reported record levels of entrepreneurial activity. Then, once the pandemic hit, the rate of closures for those businesses skyrocketed. A few months later, that activity actually rebounded, and by mid August, there was 56% more new business applications. So it was pretty great to see that quick turnaround time. All this is to say is that there are a lot of factors that can make starting a business tough, but you should always look at what could be done, right, with your ideas and your potential business to hopefully help you benefit. So let's talk about some of the benefits of launching your own business. First is greater financial success. So you could go to college and you could do all the right things. You could be the smartest person on earth, but if you're working for somebody else, you're probably not going to be making as much money as if you were to start your own business. Starting your own business is the only true way to become wealthy. There are obviously some jobs that's the exception of, but being an accountant versus owning your own accountancy firm is going to produce a lot of different financial results, right? And that leads us to entrepreneurs, who are people who risk their time, they risk their money, and their resources to start and manage a business. You've probably heard of entrepreneurs before. You've probably heard of our venture lab before, just right here at Lackawanna College. Another great benefit is independence. Being your own boss, huge benefit. I love not answering to people as a business owner. That would be a huge benefit for me. But at the same time, that can also be somewhat of a blessing and a curse, because while you don't have to answer to anybody but yourself, you don't have to argue with anybody. You are responsible for the total success or, unfortunately, the failure of the business. You can't really blame anybody else other than yourself if you're the one leading it. Also offers great flexibility, allows you to set your own hours and control your own schedule, which is huge. And even with the rise of telecommunication services, it's easier to manage your business from the road. So if you're on a trip, a vacation, if you just don't feel like going into the office today, that's no problem. Another benefit that we want to talk about is the challenge. And you might be like, well, how the heck is that a benefit? Well, because running your own business provides a challenge that you can't get working anywhere else. And we as humans love challenges. I know we might not think it, but we do love challenges. We love to overcome those challenges. Overcoming those challenges makes us feel so good. And another benefit is you're never bored. You're constantly doing things. You're constantly on the go working, which makes you never bored. Another thing to talk about is survival. So this is where things get a little less favorable, I guess, depending on your situation. So most people that launch their business in response to an opportunity with the hopes of improving their lives. Some believe that it's their only economic option to climb out of their situation. And as we'll see in a little bit, unfortunately, 3/4 of small business owners, or I'm sorry, I believe it's in the first year, 25 or 50% of businesses fail. So that plays into survival rates. We'll get into that though. Now let's talk about the entrepreneur, stepping away from the business. Let's talk about the entrepreneur itself. So there's something called the entrepreneurial mindset, right? It's a matter of attitude, right? Your attitude that you have about the business. Almost every entrepreneur starts a small business, but not every small business starts as an entrepreneur, right? An entrepreneur is someone who's a go-getter, right? They launch their firm expecting to better themselves, but nearly 70% of small business owners say they don't want to grow any larger, right? So that's that different mindset. You might start a business, but you don't want to actually, majority of them don't want to grow bigger, right? They don't want to grow. They're happy or content with where they're at. You need to think differently. You need to think and have a different mindset, right? You're not just working as an employee doing what you're tasked to do. As an entrepreneur, you have to do what you need to do and then some. You need to come up with new, innovative ways to make your business financially viable and worthwhile. So, some characteristics of an entrepreneur. Uh, while there's a lot of conflicting opinions about what makes a successful entrepreneur, there are a few common characteristics that experts believe an entrepreneur has. So, an entrepreneur has vision. They're self-reliant, right? They bring energy and they're confident, right? Their tolerance of uncertainty is considerable. They're not wavered or worried about uncertainty, and they're not wavered or worried about failure. I mean, of course they're worried about failure, but that doesn't hugely impact them. And most successful entrepreneurs have a combination of all of these factors and characteristics. So to actually start up a business, you need money, right? You need funding. So let's talk about some funding options that exist out there for small businesses and entrepreneurs. So first off, right off the bat, you have personal resources. So 3/4 of small business owners spend their own savings as a source of startup funding. More than 64% of total startup financing comes from personal resources. Sometimes people borrow from friends and family, and they use a professional agreement when possible. I highly recommend staying away from that. That's just my personal belief because, it's kind of spells a recipe for disaster asking family for money. What if you can't pay it out or things like that? That gets a little tricky, especially if you want a relationship with those people. It's not a bad option, though, that yields no interest that you have to pay. So, it's not too bad of an option if you think you can make it manage. You can also use personal credit, right? Personal credit, great way to try and start up your company. It is highly risky due to financing fees that could take years to pay off, though, so be wary of that. Next, you have loans. So, getting new venture loans, though, can be challenging. As we learned in our last chapter, starting up different types of organizations and companies, they require more money. And it's hard to get a loan for a business plan that hasn't really proven itself. It doesn't have a track record. When businesses, or banks more specifically, do offer loans, they often require lots of paperwork, typically long waiting periods, and only 16.5% of new businesses launch with commercial loans as a result of this dilemma of working with a bank if you don't have a track record. And virtually no institution is going to lend you 100% of what you need. They'll offer you a portion, not the full shebang though. So you might still need personal resources or some of the other ones that we're going to talk about. Good source of loans for small businesses is the U.S. Small Business Administration, or the SBA. So essentially what this does is it partially guarantees loans from local commercial lenders, which reduces the lender's risk. If it reduces the lender's risk, they're more likely to actually lend you money to start up a new business. They also have a microloan program, which lends on average of $13,000 for starting up a new business, which is a pretty great thing to have. You also have something called crowdfunding. You've probably heard of this term before. It's become popular in the last 10 to 15-ish years. So it's the process of funding ventures by raising money from a large number of investors via the internet. Essentially, you go on the internet and say, here's my business idea. Please invest. I would really love it if you invested. Some of the biggest ones are Indiegogo. You have Kickstarter. You have GoFundMe.com. Lots of different large websites that you could go get crowdfunding on. And you also have some successful examples. So Pebble smartwatch, right? You may have heard of that term before. They're one of the early pioneers of smartwatches. It raised $1 million in just 28 hours. That's pretty crazy. You also have something called Skybell, which was a smart doorbell that raised around $600,000 in the first 30 days. That's a lot of money. Lots and lots of money. So another way you could get funding is through something called angel investors, which are individuals who invest in startup companies with high growth potential in exchange for a share of the ownership, right? So they're saying, all right, I'll give you money. I want to own part of the business. Oftentimes, they're looking for businesses that are going to grow by 30 to 40%, right? Because if you're going to own a business, you clearly want some, decent benefits from it, especially long term. And it's estimated that around 10 to 15% of these businesses actually fit that description. You have something called venture capital firms, which are companies that invest in startup businesses with high growth potential in exchange for a share of the ownership. Uh, the share of that ownership could be as high as 60%. So these are companies very similar to angel investors, but they want typically a very high percentage of ownership. So there's some opportunities and threats that we're going to finish out this lecture with for small businesses. So because of their size, they can actually exploit narrow profitable market niches, right? So what is a market niche? It's a small segment of a market with fewer competitors than the market as a whole. So this tends to be quite attractive to small firms, right? Because you're not competing with Apple and Microsoft. You're competing with very small individuals or small businesses. So you could hopefully expand your whatever technology product that you're trying to build, or whatever product or service you offer. You also have personal customer service. So small firms can develop a better sense of customer service, which is hugely awesome. And that personal touch could be super beneficial, right? Especially in foreign markets. You've probably all been to a business before where the owner, they know you, they know what you like, right? They can have a conversation with you, and that personal touch adds a real nice sense of, I want to go back there. Another benefit is lower overhead costs, which is super great. So entrepreneurs, they often wear multiple hats, such as the CEO, the customer service rep, possibly the bookkeeper, the cleaning service. They have lots of different hats, and allows them to pay less people, which is great. You could run into an issue later on that you don't know enough about a certain field, so that could be a problem, right? Especially when it comes to things like bookkeeping. Technology, right? Internet plays a crucial role for small businesses. Internet tools allow you to sell your products to people that aren't near your physical location, right? I mean, you could go online, and a lot of businesses sell their product online nowadays, which is awesome. Creates international, the internet has created international opportunities for businesses. So those are the opportunities. We'll finish out with the threats now. So there's a high risk of failure. As I was saying before, there's pretty good odds that the business might not make it past the first few years of business. As the business grows in size, not grows in size, as the longer the business exists, the more likely it is for it to fail up to a certain point, which is obviously not great to think about. The survival rate decreases with each passing year. Lack of knowledge and experience, as I just mentioned a minute ago, is a problem, right? You might not know enough about the legal system, which could lead to issues. You might not know enough about accounting or bookkeeping, which could lead to issues. Another threat is too little money, right? If you don't have enough money to keep the business going through a tough time, that could be a problem, right? If you're in the red for a month or two, that could be a big problem. Could spell disaster. You may have to close your doors. There's a big regulatory burden because you might not know that much about regulations, and that's pretty hard to overcome, right? If you don't even know where to start. And another bigger one is higher health insurance costs, right? Bigger companies with more than 50 plus employees, or whatever the regulation is at the time of this recording, they get discounts. The more employees they have, the more discounts they have. If you only have a small number of full-time employees, your health insurance could be a bit of a burden. All right, that is going to be the end of chapter 7. We will see you in the next chapter.